Over the last 10 years in the MCU, we've seen struggles and sacrifices, challenges overcome, and characters redeemed. And with the first episode of the new Loki series, we just discovered that absolutely none of that mattered at all.
You serious?
In just this first episode, Disney has managed to completely and utterly destroy any investment in the outcome for the MCU stories. Everything is predetermined, nothing matters. Choice and consequence are rendered into a joke. And this doesn't just apply to the previous movies and stories either, but this also applies to all of the future movies as well. I cannot begin to emphasize how unbelievably mind-numbingly stupid this show is and how much damage it did to the entire MCU in just the first episode. WandaVision was terrible. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was worse. I honestly had no idea how Disney was going to drop the bar even lower with Loki, but somehow they managed to do it.
This is terrible.
Loki is bad. Season 1, Episode 1. The beginning of the episode picks up during the Endgame movie, where Loki is able to escape using the Tesseract. For some reason, the portal opens up high in the air, and when Loki impacts the ground, his super strong special handcuffs get shattered into a million pieces, so a 100-foot fall will break these, but Loki's super strength can't? Okay, whatever. Next up, several people in uniforms arrive from an organization known as the TVA, the Time Variance Authority. This woman is known as Hunter B-15, but I'm pretty certain they never actually even say her name during the entire episode. I had to go and look it up to find out what her name actually was. And oh yeah, we also get this amazing piece of acting from her.
Hands up. You're coming with us.
Then sassy Black Lady beats up Loki, taking him into custody, turning him into yet more of a joke character. Yeah, it was funny when the Incredible Hulk threw around Loki, because Loki was greatly overestimating his own capabilities against the Hulk. But now we're expected to believe that sassy Black Lady is now on par with the Incredible Hulk for defeating Loki? Loki's taken to the TVA headquarters, and then one of the TVA soldiers plants a device known as a reset charge that destroys the entire timeline and everyone in it. Wait a second here. Thanos was incredibly evil for destroying half the life in a single timeline, and yet when the TVA destroys all the life in a timeline, that's okay? How does that work out? Not only that, but we learn later in the episode that the TVA uses these reset charges to destroy entire timelines on a regular daily basis.
Are we the baddies?
Now, right away, I know some people might be saying, well, it's a reset charge, means that it's resetting the timeline, not destroying it. But no, that's not the case. It's made clear later on that the timeline is actually being destroyed. Just so we're clear on how stupid this show is already, over the last 10 years in the MCU, in order to make big universe-changing events, you needed to collect all 6 of the Infinity Stones, bring them together, and they usually had some sort of severe effect on the person using them. Now, you have all of these frequently used reset charges that are disposable that seemingly anybody can use from the TVA, and they're used almost all the time, and they're more powerful than all of the Infinity Stones combined.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
We learn later that the word reset is not meant to reset a specific timeline, some of these branching timelines. Instead, it's used to reset the overall sacred timeline by destroying those other versions that shouldn't exist. Immediately, you should be able to see some pretty big problems with that sort of thing. Why didn't the TVA interfere when Doctor Strange was using the Time Stone? Why didn't the TVA interfere when the Avengers and Thanos were jumping between different timelines? Don't worry, that does get addressed later on, but the answer is really, really dumb. Upon arriving at the TVA headquarters, we meet this idiot sitting behind a desk, and sassy Black Lady signs in Loki and then hands over the Tesseract as evidence, and the guy behind the desk says, "Can you tell me what this is?" You have got to be fucking kidding me. This guy, who works at what is supposed to be the most powerful organization in all of the entire multiverse, which is responsible for all of the timelines and controlling the powerful artifacts and the people and all that sort of stuff, he doesn't know what the Tesseract is. He doesn't even know what the Infinity Stones are. We'll get to that later, because that gets even dumber. But are you serious? What writer thought that this was going to be funny? It doesn't matter if the guy is just a clerk behind the desk. every single person in the TVA would know what the Infinity Stones are, what the Tesseract is. Even the guy cleaning the toilets would know what these things are. But don't worry, it gets worse. It gets so much worse. We then get an exposition dump about the TVA and the sacred timeline. Essentially, long ago, there was a whole bunch of timelines that were in conflict with each other and nearly destroyed the multiverse. Then 3 entities known as the Timekeepers unified all of the timelines into one and named it the Sacred Timeline. And whenever someone does something that's not supposed to happen, that person is called a variant. The TVA will then go and arrest that person and return them to where they were supposed to be in that timeline. This will also result in the TVA using one of those reset charges to destroy the entire timeline if that seemed to be necessary for whatever reason. This entire situation is just a huge ball of stupidity. The only variants that the TVA would ever really need to go after and to apprehend are the ones that travel into different timelines. There's absolutely no reason for the TVA to apprehend Loki when he is still within his own timeline and they plan to, quote-unquote, reset it by destroying it. So they could have just left him there in the desert, they could have dropped down that stupid charge, melted away the entire timeline, and it wouldn't have done anything. Like, there was no reason to grab him and bring him to the TVA headquarters. It doesn't make any sense. They even point this out later on because he can't return to his own timeline because they melted it.
How dumb are you?
Also, I think it's kind of important to point out that everything we just learned in this first episode of Loki completely contradicts everything that we learned in the Endgame movie. During Endgame, we found out that there are other timelines that get created whenever you go back in time. It's not possible to actually go back into your own timeline. They're not able to do that. That's kind of like the big explainer that happened during the Endgame movie. You can't go back into your own time. So when you do go back, what you do is you end up creating an alternate branching timeline, and then you can kind of interact in that and then go back to your own. When Bruce Banner is talking to the Ancient One, she explains that removing the Infinity Stone would cause irreparable damage to her new, now created timeline, and this is why they need to return the stones so that everything doesn't get thrown into chaos. Remember, the TVA and the Timekeepers only want that one timeline to exist, which is known as the Sacred Timeline. And this means that all of those other branching timelines that were created in the Endgame movie must have been visited by a TVA agent who then dropped down a reset charge and melted the entire dimension, melted the entire timeline. So all of those other places, when Steve Rogers had to go back in time to return the stones, that was completely pointless because all of those timelines were then interfered with and had been destroyed by the TVA by melting them out of existence. Now, obviously, Steve Rogers and the other Avengers didn't know that the TVA was going to go in and completely destroy all those other timelines, but still, it's incredibly stupid. Hey, you know all that extra work you did and all that extra stuff that you had to do in order to make sure that everything was working great? Yeah, we're just going to melt those timelines away anyways. So, you know, thanks, but it wasn't needed, I guess. In the next scene, we get to meet Mobius, who's investigating a crime in a church in the year 1549. One of the other TVA agents says it's him, indicating that they know who it was that perpetrated the crime, and Mobius agrees, noting that the victim has stab wounds and was taken by surprise. Weird. I wonder if there are any characters in the MCU that have the ability to suddenly appear, take their enemies by surprise, and stab them. I wonder who it's going to be. It's such a big... It's fucking Loki. If you're not able to figure this out, then I don't know what to tell you. The thing is, though, that this is supposed to be a big secret of who the mystery killer is. Before this scene, I thought maybe they might have been setting up Kang the Conqueror with the entire Loki series, and he probably will show up at some point. Maybe they'll save him for one of the big MCU movies and just kind of tease him here. But remember, Disney thinks you're an idiot. They want you to believe stupid things like Wanda is a hero or a racist like Sam Wilson is somehow fit to be Captain America. They expect you to be an idiot and they don't expect that you have enough functioning brain cells to instantly realize that the person responsible for this incident is Loki. But the scene leaves it as a big mystery that's gonna be revealed at the end of the episode.
Yeah, I pulled a sneaky on you.
During the investigation, a little girl wanders into the church. Mobius has a pleasant conversation with her, tries to get some information out of her, and also shows a funny animated stick figure on his phone tablet device thing. Now, keep in mind that this little girl lives in the year 1549, and all of this would just seem unbelievable to her. She would immediately think that this is some form of magic and just probably freak out about it, but instead she just kind of smiles and just acts like everything is normal. Mobius notices that her mouth is blue because she was eating some candy that apparently Loki, the mystery person had given to her. So Mobius takes the candy from her and sends her outside, at which point the TVA agent uses a reset charge to destroy the entire timeline. So not only did Mobius kill this girl and everyone else in the timeline, but he stole her fucking candy before he did it.
I hate this. It is revolting.
In the next scene, Loki is on trial for his supposed crime of being a variant, and we're introduced to... Who is this now? Hang on a second here. Let me check the casting notes. So this is Ravonna Renslayer? No. That can't be right, because Ravonna is supposed to look like this. I mean, Ravonna is very obviously a white woman with red hair, and... Oh, okay, yeah, they're doing this garbage again. Oh boy. Yet another character is the victim of racist blackwashing. You see, my fellow plebeians, this is what the woke weirdos refer to as the good kind of racism, or something like that. Wonderful. Well, this is not Ravonna, and I'm not going to call her that. Let me think. What's a good name for a white woman that's pretending to be black? Oh, I know. We'll call her Rachel. So Rachel asks Loki how he wants to plead for the crime of being a time variant, and Loki brings up a very good point that he didn't do anything wrong and that it was the Avengers who were the ones messing around with time, which is completely accurate. Though how Loki knows this is really stupid. He claims that he knows the Avengers were messing around with the timeline because he could smell the cologne from the other Tony Stark.
What?
Putting aside how unbelievably fucking ridiculous it is that Loki was able to decipher time travel by smelling multiple versions of Tony Stark, Rachel's answer to this entire situation is just as dumb.
Why don't you explain this to me like I'm 5?
Let's follow along. Rachel says that all the actions of the Avengers played out as they were intended, which means that Tony and Steve going back that extra time in order to get the Tesseract was intended in the sacred timeline. It was meant for Tony to go back and to meet his father and have a little conversation and stuff. But if that's the case, then why is it Loki taking the Tesseract from the other timeline was not intended? Because that was the catalyst that caused Steve and Tony to go back in that extra jump. So if they were intended to go back in that extra jump, exactly what was it that was going to happen to make them go back in that extra jump? Because the only thing I can think of is that Loki would take the Tesseract, so they weren't able to get it there, so they had to go to another place. So how is it that Steve and Tony making that extra jump was intended to happen, yet the event that caused them to go back into that extra jump was not intended to happen? It doesn't make any sense. It's just a bunch of stupid.
It is a tale told by an idiot.
And yet stupid Rachel still insists that Loki did something wrong and sentences him to be reset. And again, to clarify, the word reset is being used in place of destroying, or in this case, it would mean the execution of Loki. Yes, in the little thing that they showed earlier with the exposition, they showed that sometimes people would be brought back into their own proper timeline and then set back on the correct path. But that isn't possible because Loki's entire timeline was destroyed. We know about this, we're told about this later, and when Loki goes to talk to Mobius, he says, "Are you taking me somewhere to be killed?" And Mobius says, "No, that was what was just gonna happen. I stopped that from happening." Namely, he stopped Loki from being reset, i.e. executed, and instead, he wants to talk to Loki. So yes, whenever you hear the word reset in this show, it either means that they're going to kill someone or they're destroying a timeline. It doesn't mean that they're just putting it back to the way it was. As Loki is being dragged out of the room, Mobius steps forward and asks Rachel if he can take control over Loki, as it will help him in his current investigation. Rachel is uncertain, but agrees, and then Mobius says, "I feel like I am always looking up to you. I like it. It's appropriate."
She was such a strong female woman.
I can't. I just fucking can't. This is so blatant. This is so obvious. Not only did they racist blackwash this character, but they made Mobius, who appears to be one of the only white people in the entire TVA, into a beta who's simping for her. Are you fucking kidding? Do the woke writers at Disney actually think this is anywhere remotely close to good?
And then the woke came and decided to completely destroy everything.
All right, whatever. Mobius takes Loki into the separate room and he shows Loki images from his past and some from the future. Remember, at this point in time, Loki is still a villain. He is very evil right now. After the Avenger movie, it took a long time before Loki would ultimately redeem himself and die a hero. And Disney wants to take all of that and condense it down into a 10-minute discussion in this room. Yeah, it's really, really stupid. The super talented people at Disney thought that they could accomplish all of that having Loki sit in a room with Mobius where Mobius acts as a therapist. This is their brilliant idea on how to turn Loki from being an incredibly evil person instantly into a hero so that they can have the show.
Not a great plan.
During this therapy session, we get some flashbacks showing that Loki was actually D.B. Cooper. Hey kids, remember D.B. Cooper? Disney wasted over 3 minutes of this episode's time on a joke that the vast majority of the audience won't even get. Loki then sees the death of his mother and that he was partly responsible for it, and he finally starts to break down, but then sassy Black Lady enters the room and distracts Mobius. Loki uses this as an opportunity to steal the little device that controls the collar around Loki's neck. Loki then uses it to escape from the room. He finds the moron behind the desk at the beginning of the episode and demands the Tesseract, or else he will gut the clerk like a fish, but then the clerk doesn't understand. He says he doesn't know what a fish is.
Look at this idiot. One ball and no brains.
Okay, I get it. You did this joke at the beginning of the episode when he didn't know what the Tesseract was, but now you're telling me he doesn't know what a fish is? Like, this is not funny. Who in the writing room thought that this was going to be funny? And Loki even like, how do you not know what a fish is? And the guy just says, well, I lived my whole life in the TVA headquarters and I don't really go outside. It doesn't matter. You should still know what a fish is. This is just stupid. This is bottom of the barrel writing. This is awful. Just absolutely terrible. But don't worry, it gets worse. It gets so much worse. The clerk opens his desk, Loki takes out the Tesseract, but then sees that the drawer is full of Infinity Stones from different timelines. The clerk doesn't know what any of them are, and says that the people in the office just use them as paperweights. The main plot device for the last 10 years of the MCU has been reduced to a joke of being junk in the desk drawer of a moron.
I don't think it's funny.
I don't even know how to express this level of stupidity. It's just mind-boggling. I cannot believe everything that is happening in this show right now. A really big change that they made from the comics for the MCU was that in the MCU, Infinity Stones can be used anywhere, even outside of their own home dimension or their own home timeline. This is why Avengers were able to take the Infinity Stones from other timelines and then use them in their own one to undo the snap. This obviously creates a big problem, though, because it means that anyone could go to any other timeline whenever and just get more Infinity Stones and bring them back. You would have tons and tons of Infinity Stones just rolling around the MCU, people using them whenever they want, because you could just go and grab them from other timelines. Obviously, this was going to be a problem, so it appears that the way that Disney is addressing this is that they just turn the Infinity Stones into a joke. They were the most powerful objects in the universe. and now it's just junk in a drawer. Oddly enough, this sort of joke would actually work in the comics where the Infinity Stones cease to function whenever they leave their home dimension. So you could have them in a drawer or as decoration on a shelf or something. They wouldn't do anything because they're not in their home dimension. But in the MCU, as was previously established, they do work when you take them out of their own timeline or different dimension or whatever. So they would still be incredibly powerful. All of these stones should still be working in this idiot's desk drawer. But later we get a little bit of a hand wave from Mobius where he says that the Infinity Stones don't work in the TVA headquarters.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
The idea that these stones will work anywhere in any dimension in any timeline, yet they somehow stop working in the TVA headquarters, is stupid beyond comprehension. There are some very powerful cosmic beings within the Marvel Universe, but there are only two that are actually able to stop the Infinity Stones from working: the Living Tribunal and the One Above All. The idea that the Infinity Stones would work everywhere except the TVA headquarters is absurd. Regardless of that nonsense, upon seeing these incredibly powerful objects being treated as garbage, it causes problems for Loki. He has a little bit of a break and he starts to question things, so he goes back to that room and he starts looking at the rest of his own timeline, whereupon he sees his own redemption and eventual death by Thanos. Mobius confronts him and Loki just breaks down. He admits that he never wanted to be a bad guy and that everything he did was just an act.
How about no?
This is how they decided to reduce Loki's entire redemption arc and sacrifice over the course of several movies, and they did it by making it down to a 30-second bit of dialogue. Absolutely pathetic. Mobius explains that he doesn't really see Loki as being a villain, and now presents Loki with the opportunity to help capture a dangerous variant. Loki says, "Why me? Why would you need me to help?" And Mobius explains that the dangerous variant is another version of Loki. Surprise!
We don't care.
Let me tell you
We don't care.
The scene cuts away and we see some TVA soldiers investigating another incident, and then suddenly all of the TVA soldiers get killed and a reset charge is stolen. You know, that thing that's more powerful than all of the Infinity Stones combined, the thing that's capable of wiping out an entire timeline, that thing, yeah, it gets stolen. The mysterious figure is pretty much Loki, because we already know that, we were told that, but there's a catch! You see, if you look at the main casting for this show, and this was actually a big thing leading up for the release of this series, was that they had cast a female actor to play as a different version of Loki. So that's who the villain of this story is going to be. It's a female version of Loki, who I am absolutely certain will be smarter, stronger, a better fighter, and in every way possible, more stunningly and more bravingly than the male version of Loki, because of course.
Great job, Morty. A feminist masterpiece.
Okay, yes, there are some real-world mythology stories about a female Loki, but if you think any of the morons at Marvel did even a second of research on that stuff, then you got another thing coming. Remember, you're talking about the same Marvel people who racist blackwashed Valkyrie and Heimdall. Do you really think that they care in any way whatsoever about accurately portraying Norse mythology? The answer is no.
I am shocked. Shocked!
But what about the comics, I hear the woke weirdo say. Yeah, you mean the ones that you never read? You're trying to play off of those? Okay, sure. Loki was female for about 3.5 seconds, but that was because his soul was accidentally placed inside the body of Sif. It wasn't because he was a female or he completely turned into one or none of that stuff, right? There was some magical nonsense where his soul was accidentally placed in the wrong body, and then very soon after it was taken out and put into the correct male body. So, no, that doesn't matter.
You're a man when I tell you you're a man.
Now, I realize that Tom Hiddleston is probably one of the most popular actors in all of the MCU, but to be completely honest, given the direction that Disney is going, I would not be surprised in the slightest if they end up just completely removing Tom Hiddleston's male version of the character at the end of this series and just outright replacing him with the female version of the character. They might have some sort of magic switcheroo, or maybe the female version goes through a redemption arc or whatever. Who knows what they're going to do. But I would not be surprised in the slightest if they end up just completely getting rid of Tom Hiddleston and instead having the female version of Loki from the MCU going forward. I mean, Disney has already said that they want to have the next Avengers team be all women, and while they certainly have Jane Foster to kind of push Thor aside, they might end up having the female Loki as well.
That is an incredibly outmoded and sexist attitude.
Regardless, this show is absolute fucking garbage. We now know that everything that happened in previous movies happened because they were supposed to. And everything that's going to happen in the future movies is also supposed to. They've completely removed any sense of consequence. There's no reason to be invested in the outcomes of the future movies because everything is just supposed to play out the way it is supposed to happen, right? Like, it's just so dumb. There's no tension. There's no consequence. You don't have choices in anything anymore. None of these characters actually get to make any meaningful decisions. Everything that they do was pre-planned out beforehand. So it's not like a character can decide to make a sacrifice. It was already done for them. Their sacrifice is meaningless. What Tony Stark did is meaningless. This is all just so stupid. Because if anyone ever does try to make some changes, then the TVA will arrive, they'll put down one of the reset charges, and they just destroy the entire timeline, killing everyone in it. This is just like Thanos times 1,000. I mean, he wiped out half the life in one timeline. The TVA is wiping out entire timelines every single day. Again, Marvel and Disney's idea of what a hero is so unbelievably messed up. I am genuinely amazed that Disney managed to make a show with a character as popular as Loki, and somehow it is worse than WandaVision or Falcon and the Winter Soldier. That level of incompetence is truly impressive. But that's the end of episode 1.